From all the drama surrounding his fight against Petr Yan to his controversial support for Andrew Tate, here's why the UFC world hates Aljamain Sterling. Aljo's one of the most promising fighters in the UFC these days, but let's be real, he's also one of the most controversial dudes in the game, and it's definitely got something to do with his fight against Petr Yan. The two first clashed for the UFC bantamweight title in 2021, and even though Sterling landed a few good shots, Yan totally dominated the first 3 rounds, and it looked like all was over for Aljo. But things took a completely different turn in the 4th round, cause Yan messed up big time when he hit Sterling with an illegal knee. Here's how it happened. Sterling had one knee on the ground so that he could avoid his strikes and grab his leg while Yan attacked him. But Yan ended up landing an illegal knee to Sterling's chin while he was still grounded. After that, Aljo put on the performance of a lifetime. Even though he was medically cleared after 2 minutes, Sterling stayed down for over 5, which meant that Yan had to face disqualification and lose the belt. So by default, Aljo was the UFC bantamweight champion. And how did fans of the sport react to Aljo's win? They were beyond annoyed, because they thought Sterling could have gotten up and fought like a true champion would. For context, back when Jon Jones and Anthony Smith clashed just a year before, Smith was also hit with an illegal knee, but he chose to continue the fight, even though he ultimately lost and missed out on the chance to win the title. So tons of UFC fans quickly took to the internet to boo Sterling for all the dramatics, and call him a fraud, and use a lot of colorful language. But his actions after the fight got him into even more trouble. Yep, I'm talking about the whole belt situation. At the start, Sterling did the whole thing where he rejected the belt, and it looked like he was trying to make a statement about the way the fight had ended. Maybe he felt like he didn't truly deserve to be the champion? But humility was never Aljo's best trait, because his teammates, Alia Quinta and Merab Dvalishvili, went ahead and posted pictures of him grinning from ear to ear with the belt as if he'd earned it. This made everyone very confused, because just moments ago Sterling had made it a point to not flaunt the controversial victory. The UFC fans and analysts were quick to bash Sterling for the photos, and even Yan got in on the action by tossing out a clown emoji. But despite all the backlash, Sterling stood by his decision to pose with the belt. He said that his teammates had asked him to do it, and that he only did it to make them happy. The UFC world wasn't buying it, because they expected a fighter of his level to be more careful with a title like that. But Aljo's teammates didn't ask him to disrespect Yan the way he did, so he can't make up an excuse for that. Before their clash at UFC 259, Sterling called Aljo a paper champ, which was a comment that didn't age well after Aljo won the fight the way he did. But the irony didn't stop him from relentlessly dissing Yan before their rematch in 2022, and he got some serious backlash for that. Sterling shared a tweet which suggested that all Russian fighters were cheaters. But he later clarified his statement and said that he didn't mean to stereotype all Russian fighters that way, but he still stood by the idea that Yan was a dirty cheat. Sterling's original tweet got a lot of backlash from fans and the MMA community, calling him out for making generalizations about fighters based on their nationality. Besides calling Yan an overrated fighter, Sterling also called him a dirty rat. Now don't get me wrong, trash talk is obviously a big part of MMA. But everyone thought Aljo took it a bit too far, especially when he doesn't have a squeaky clean past himself. For those who don't know, a lot of people felt Aljo was holding up the division after his injury back in 2021. The UFC knew that Aljo's win was super controversial, so they quickly tried to book a rematch on the 30th of October at UFC 267 that same year. But Aljo shocked everyone by pulling out. Turns out, Aljo had to get neck surgery because of the hard hits he faced in his fight with Yan, and he couldn't fight for months because of this. I know he probably did need the break, but the timing was just super suspicious. And it played right into the idea that Aljo was trying to dodge his rematch with Yan, which the UFC world was certain he would lose. When their rematch did happen at UFC 273 in 2022, Sterling shattered everyone's expectations. Even though Jan won rounds 4 and 5, Sterling completely dominated him on the canvas, and he even earned a 10-8 in the second with his impressive grappling skills. Now, the UFC fans would have been quick to apologize for doubting Sterling all along, but they were totally pushed away by his snobby attitude afterwards. And Aljo only makes things worse for himself when he acts super petty, with other opponents too. Just look at how heated things got with him and Henry Cejudo at UFC 288. After shoving his opponent at the ceremonial weigh-ins, Sterling went on to win the title in a close and competitive fight. But that's not where the drama ended. It turns out that Sterling and Cejudo had made a bet with Cejudo's Olympic gold medal on the line. But even though Sterling had won the bet, Cejudo has yet to honor his promise and hand over the medal. So Sterling is calling him out on it, and he's even going as far as publicly questioning why he hasn't followed through. While it makes sense that Sterling wants to collect on the bet, UFC fans thought that Sterling was being super petty about the whole thing. After all, he was the champion, but he wasn't acting like it. And don't forget, Cejudo's a former UFC bantamweight and flyweight champion, so the way Sterling was behaving seemed out of line to a lot of UFC fans. It looks like Sterling doesn't just pick fights with other UFC fighters. He's also got beef with the organization itself. The UFC had big plans for Sterling's fight against Sean O'Malley for the bantamweight title at UFC 292. But it looks like Sterling isn't quite on board with the scheme, and he started asking for alternative dates on Twitter. Meanwhile, O'Malley seemed to be pretty set on the original date of August 19. And of course, Dana White couldn't resist throwing a little shade at Sterling, and he accused him of being his own worst enemy during a recent press conference. Aljo wasn't thrilled about Uncle Dana's call out to him for delaying his comeback. So he went on his YouTube channel to talk about the drama. He said that since he was the champ, he should have some say in when he fights next. Sterling then rattled off a list of his accomplishments and injuries sustained, trying to make it clear that he was more than willing to work with the UFC to meet their needs. "Don't play with my name, bro," he even said at one point to Dana. Fans thought Sterling was being super ungrateful, because he couldn't just use his champ status to change fight dates when he wanted, especially when it was Dana's responsibility to promote the UFC, make it the top dog in the MMA world, and create some of the biggest stars in the sport. While we are on the topic of reasons Aljo gets hate, we have to talk about his controversial opinions outside of the sport. In 2022, he came out on Twitter to defend Andrew Tate, a former professional kickboxer and super controversial figure online. It all started when the champion posted pictures of himself with Tate, which drew a lot of backlash from fans who were shocked by Sterling's support for him. In response, Sterling tried really hard to clarify his position and went back and forth with some Twitter users, but instead, he ended up making himself look even worse. Not only did he continue to support Tate, but he also showed that he agreed with some of Andrew's scandalous opinions on women and assault. Yikes! The whole situation made Aljo lose tons of fans, and the fact that he didn't seem to care just rubbed them the wrong way. So there you have it. From his controversial support for Andrew Tate to all the drama that came with his fight against Piotr Jan. That's why the UFC world hated Aljamain Sterling.